Good evening, everybody, and welcome back to this week's edition of the Warren Files. Um, as you can see, we have a different co-host this week. We have Lana, the UK director. Um,
Hi.
Lana's been with us for a couple years, and we always enjoy having her on. I, she removed the toothpicks from her eyelids because it's currently 1 o'clock in the morning over in the UK, and I see Neil still has his in, so he's going to pull those out before we go on camera. Um, but tonight we have a very good guest. The guest is a friend of Lana's as well. Lana, do you want to introduce him, or do you want me to?
You can introduce him. You
Okay.
can introduce him.
His name is Neil Story. He's a historian and an author. He's written over 50 books. A lot of them topics that I like am totally into, like World War One, World War Two. He's written a lot of local history books by the looks of it. But he's also got into some, he does true crime stories, Dracula. He wrote one about Jack the Ripper, which we're going to ask him about. So his newest book is right behind me. It's called Bram Stoker, author of Dracula. That's his latest book, and it's the true story of the Dracula story and the man that wrote it. So let's go ahead and bring him on. There's no point in him sitting in the back and listening to me babble. So, Neil, welcome. How you doing?
Greetings. I'm very well. Lovely to see you, Lana, and lovely to
Lovely to
meet
see
you
you.
in person over these many miles, Jeff.
Thank you.
I've got to say, I've known the names of Ed and Lorraine all my life of an interest in the paranormal. It's one of those full circle moments. It's lovely to be here.
Yeah, cool.
Thank
you. I have to, before we even start, I have to apologize to you because I made one of the biggest no mistakes that a broadcaster can make. I spelled your last name wrong.
I can live with that.
No, it's not. I noticed that today, and I'm like, oh my gosh, you did not do that.
But do you know the original of the Story surname? It can be spelled Story.
Yeah.
EY, or even in Scotland, where they pronounce it Story, they spell it with a double RY. So actually, do you know?
Yeah, but that's one thing when I first started doing this, when I first started making videos and things like that, I put a misspelling in once, and somebody called me on it. And ever since then, I really, really try to double and triple check everything. And this could be the first mistake like that I've made since that first instance.
Well,
it's probably not, but I just, like I said, it bothered me.
You've made that mistake with the right person.
That's good. So this is kind of funny and related. Last week we had Ralph Sarchi on. I don't know if you're familiar with the movie Deliver Us from Evil. It's about a New York cop.
Yeah.
Eric Bana is in it.
I think I've seen that along the way.
He turned into a demonologist after his police career. So anyway, we had him on last week, but in order, I sent him a message to ask him to be on the show, and my autocorrect changed the spelling of his name. So this big long message I sent to him, and just begged him to come on the show and this and that and the other thing. And his reply back to me was, hey, you really misspelled my name pretty bad. And I was just like, oh no, we're never going to get this guy on. I was so
mad. No.
But he came on. He was a fantastic guest.
Good guy. I like that.
Yeah. That was a good show. So, like I said in your intro, you've written a lot of books on topics that I would really, relate to or read. I wish I had a lot more time to read than I do, but, one of them that stuck out to me was like the Nazi spies. That one is one that I would probably buy. And then the Dracula Secrets, the Jack the Ripper book.
It's a heady brew, isn't it?
It is. What is that book about?
The Jack the Ripper book?
Yeah.
I've had an interest in Jack the Ripper since the 1980s, before the centenary year of the Jack the Ripper crimes was 1988, and I was certainly intrigued by the crimes before then. Mm-hmm. I think I had one of these kind of kids' books of murder.
Yeah.
I don't know, the Hamlin Book of Murder, something like that.
Yeah.
I don't know. And there was something about, and we know that in reality there were no swirling mists on the nights that Jack the Ripper committed his murders. But for me, it was gaslight, swirling mists,
Yeah.
gas lamps, just the imagination. And then on TV, we had the two Ronnies, which were very popular comedians, and they had the phantom raspberry blower of old London town, who would go round and upset people with Victorian sensibilities in his top hat and his cape, and he would leap out at them and go.
Yeah.
I thought,
Jeez.
I thought that's bloody silly,
Yeah.
but it was all that kind of feet on the cobbles, gas lamps.
Yeah.
It intrigued a young mind, and it still intrigues me today.
I saw your I watched I'm friends with Paul Goddard as well. And I saw your collection of Topps cards that you had from when you were a kid. In fact, I'm going to bring it up, and I've got to attribute this to being on Paul's show, but you had told a story about how your mom always carried a Haunted Britain book around with her.
Oh, yeah, guys would commonly stop right. Hippisley Cox.
Right. And then, but you said something about you were allowed to watch Dracula because your parents knew that you wouldn't actually watch it. So you told a story about your hiding behind the door. As soon as Dracula appeared, you took off, and I was reminded, for me, that was the Incredible Hulk. I was obsessed with that show, The Incredible Hulk, that was on in the 80s. Yeah, anytime he turned into the Hulk, I had to change the channel. Like when he was starting to... I
have to admit, it's when the eyes changed.
Yep.
Then it's that moment, oh, God, here it comes. And then he turns into Lou Ferrigno.
Yeah.
He goes green and his pants fall apart.
Yep.
And they even change colour. They go from the standard, fawn brown farmer cords to those purple things.
Yeah. Yep.
Or I don't know. Yeah. How does that happen? Yep.
But that absolutely that terrified me. But yet I would not miss an episode of that show. I'm gonna text Lena real quick and see what happens. She's
has she disappeared? As if
she said her Wi-Fi. I'm just gonna tell her to just try to rejoin when she can.
Oh yes, please do. She didn't get a word in edgeways, bless her. But we love Lana. She's lots of fun. She's not far from me. A very good soul, a kind soul, we love her to bits.
And she's the one that actually told me about you and what you do, and she told me all about the day that you guys met, and she's like, oh, I met this fantastic guy who's a historian, and I thought, oh, that's great. So I have to give her credit for putting you on my radar.
I thank her for that too. It's lovely to be with you. Yep. It really is.
So tell us a little bit. Obviously we're a paranormal research group. What experience do you have with the paranormal? It sounds like you have quite a bit.
It goes back, in recent years, for the last few series of a very popular show on terrestrial TV in Great Britain. It's on it's Discovery Plus when it's initially released, and then it will turn out onto one of the terrestrial channels. It's called Help My House is Haunted.
Okay. And
it's my great privilege to be one of a number of historians who work there. I work with them quite a bit with initial research into the properties, but because the format of the show is that you have to have a different historian for every episode.
Okay.
You will only see me in one episode per series, but it's now got to a stage where it's like working with old friends, and if they've got the deal always was that I will never create a story for you. It has to have genuine grounds for history, for why, and sometimes it can be a very ordinary modern house on a modern estate, but it has a historic reason for, or a possible historic reason for why that place is haunted.
Yeah.
So it's been a privilege and an absolute pleasure to work with all of that team. But that's in recent years. Where did it begin for me? About 1988. was certainly interested before that time, since I was a kid. I grew up in a historic county of Norfolk in England,
Okay.
in part of Great Britain. If you look at Great Britain, that triangle shape with that bump on the side, where the far
Okay.
eastern part,
Yep.
of Great Britain. And Norfolk is a rural county, and I'd certainly grown up surrounded by. There's all sorts of myths and legends and stories of, oh, that house is haunted, or and there was a phrase they'd say, they say a white woman walks here, or
Yeah.
they say things move around with nobody touching them, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I wanted to know why, from quite an early age. Why do they say, and who are they who say it? The inquisitive young kid, my grandmother's family certainly had the second sight. They were what they used to call cunning women in a village in those days, that they were generations of midwives in the little village of Whiten in Norfolk, extremely rural. And they brought the generations of people in that village into this world.
Right.
And my great grandfather was a great man for country cures before, veterinaries became more common. You'd have to rely on hedge witchery, hedge medicine. I don't, and they used to charm warts and things. And do a bit of table turning. I don't have those abilities to their great extent, but I think there's something, because sometimes I will sense things. Hello, Lana.
Lana's
Welcome back to your show, Lana.
Sorry about that. My Wi-Fi is playing up. It's the gremlins, I think.
Yeah, the gremlins.
It happens in the northeast. Some poor devils, they'll get me on a show, and I can't even get onto this far with a StreamYard. It's a nightmare. I'm whistling a pop and a fart,
So
I'm on my phone now. I've given up on my
the
computer.
Black Stream in the wilds of Northumberland. But I was just saying, Jeff was asking me about where did it all begin. I just gave him a little bit about my family background. But for me, and they now use the term paranormal researcher. Yeah. When I started, we were ghost hunters.
Yeah.
Right? And we weren't out to kill a ghost. We wanted to hunt them down. I wanted to research and learn. And so that was about 1988. I was at college, and there were a couple of girls, and I was in the library. And I hope have we got time for this story? You'll like it, I hope.
Yeah, for sure.
And there was a small group of us that were interested in the paranormal. It was really quite a cheap excuse to go to lovely historic buildings for a weekend. And in those days, you didn't get charged. It was all quite curious if you did it sensibly. And you'd kind of find yourself silly. Yeah. with and not drinking to excess, but there might be a bottle of wine involved as well. You're not getting plastered. It was sociable. It was just soaking up a little bit of atmosphere. And in the true and taking some stinky cheese with us as well. The big wingback chairs and just soaking it up. Lovely. Yeah, that's my kind of ghost hunter. Anyway, I don't need to
with their pipes involved.
You got it.
Exactly. Good. I'm getting this picture in my head now. I'm like,
well, I grew up in the spirit of the gentleman ghost hunters, people like Thurston Hopkins, back in the day, Wentworth Day, wonderful books. And I will be honest. I shall nail my colours to the mast and say, yes, of course, my quest is for the truth. I would never want to distort anything, but for me, it's the stories. I want to record the story, the old tales, the tales that people told for generations. And now, once we've recorded those properly in books and records and archive, then people can take away that research and find out wherever the grains of truth is. There's still something there, which is why I created a series of books called Grim Almanacs.
Oh, okay.
All the cases and all the historical stories. I would never have time to research them all, and I sold the series rights. I did East Anglia, Norfolk, Suffolk, Cambridge, Essex, Lincolnshire, London, those individual volumes. But for people that know their home territory, they wrote those for the rest of the country, and it was a wonderful thing. Anyway, where does it begin? 1988, I'm at college, and a couple of girls from it was a sort of technical college, which also had history courses. I was doing history, English literature and language and all sorts. But attached to it were hairdressing skills, makeup, all sorts. Mm-hmm. And one of the girls from the hairdressing course she used to travel on the bus with us. Me and her and her friend, rather than traveling, they'd rented a place near the college. I think the parents had a bit of money, it was. Yeah. And they said, our place is haunted. Will you come and check it out? Because it's quite frightening. It's one of these houses where you had a front and a back that had been kind of knocked through. They were rows of terraced houses, Victorian houses. Mm-hmm. And what they kept seeing was when they were sat in the front part in the sitting room, they'd see something pass behind them. And one night in particular, one of the girls has kind of put out the light when they were sleeping downstairs, and something darker than the room around them was kind of in front of the window. Mm. And it looked like a cowled shape. And it's tempting to say a black monk figure, but they didn't know what it was, and they said that was the nearest thing it could look like. It wasn't somebody in a hoodie.
Yeah.
Long tale short, we went and we investigated, and there was during the night an interesting cutout of the power, where the front part of the house, where we had in those days, you had to sort of have a video recorder with a brick that you shoved in the side, plug that in. Yeah. You've got a thermometer, and you've got a digital reader, and you've got a what they used to call an oscilloscope, which is something as big as a portable television that can move if there's any movement going on. It's bonkers. So anyway, and we had all of that, and it just cut out. It was really odd, because you had the front room, the dining room, and the back room. Yeah. Well, the back room was a kitchen. And the kitchen, we could hear the buzz of the fridge freezer still. The light hadn't gone out there. So, and remember, this is tech from the 1980s. Yeah. You don't have sort of dimmer switches on a video recorder. And the thing slowly came back to life. It was the weirdest stuff. So, come the morning, we pack everything up, get out the door, and it's been all right. We shut the door, and you have to shut the door because it's on one of those sort of Yale latches, the sort. You give it a bang, and it shuts it. Yeah. Bang. And inside the house, we heard bang. I thought, ooh. Maybe the dressmaker's dummy's fallen over. Yeah. Because they're doing fashion as part of their course. So you go inside. My friend went upstairs, and I went into the main room where we'd been, and to try and see what was going on. The dressmaker's dummy was still there, but when I went in the room, now sadly, whatever relationship you have in your life, sadly sometimes we'll have disagreements. Very unusual that people don't. Yeah. If you walk into a room after a disagreement, you can sense, they say, cut the atmosphere with a knife. Yeah. Sadly, that happens. And there'd clearly been a row going on in that room. I tell you, you could cut the atmosphere with a knife. It was leaden. Yep. And I really felt uncomfortable. Now, there's no one in the house. Yeah. There's no one there. So we check it out, and just there's nothing. And I just, as I was leaving, pulled the lounge door, which is one of these kind of fibre doors. It's got hardboard on either side with like a wood effect. They often do it in student housing, in those days. Yeah. And it's got like cardboard filler or whatever in between it. Yep. And I was I just, for some reason, the door's flat against the wall, but I just looked at the back of the door. I don't know why. I did.
Yeah.
In the back of that door, so the door would have been closed. In the back of that door were the dressmaking shears.
Oh wow.
Oh my goodness.
Hmm. That's
Now
Scary.
that hadn't been done when we left.
yeah.
In that moment, I knew that the paranormal was a real deal.
Yeah.
It exists.
Yep.
It does exist. It is powerful. It can be extreme. And if I gather that entity that was within that building, if it had wished to, could have killed any one of us.
Yeah. If it's that strong of a spirit or strong of an energy, for sure, that it can take scissors and poke a door. That's pretty crazy.
It was absolutely crazy.
Yeah.
A couple of years later, I was working. This is in Great Yarmouth in Norfolk. I was working with the Yarmouth Museum Service, and we were putting together an exhibition about the medieval monasteries there. Now, in Norfolk, we've got the greatest concentration of medieval churches in Europe. So monasteries are not unusual, and in some of these ancient towns, there's 2, 3, 4 of them, plus chapels, religious houses, all sorts.
Yeah.
And what we did was, in those days, we didn't have a lot of computer tech. So you kind of get one of these. Do you know those when you used to use an overhead projector and get this acetate, and you could print one map on that, and then there was, which is the modern map, and then we did an overlay on the archaeological map of where these places were, and we'd done that for the display, and I thought that's great.
Yeah.
And then I suddenly thought in the back of my mind, that old black monk in that house, that couple of years ago, I wonder where that was. Oh, right, that's the burial ground for the old monastery. Great.
Oh, I was going to ask you, was there any historical story behind that property? But
there was no history of a haunting in the property.
Right.
I get the feeling that the place had been knocked about a bit with building to having remained unspoilt for many, many years. At that time, families that had lived in these properties for a lot of years were moving out. They were dying out. The youngsters didn't want to live in Great Yarmouth anymore. So these were being bought up for student accommodation and knocked through. And as we all know, sometimes that sort of disturbance can trigger some sort of activity. It can release something, or it literally. But it's strange because it's said that the paranormal, that a ghost can walk through what appears to be a wall if there'd been an archway in its lifetime. So who knows?
Yep.
But something had clearly triggered that. I think because teenagers being teenagers, there will be a, should I say, romantic liaison that perhaps had not taken place in that house before, or for many years. You get the idea. Maybe the morals viewed through the medieval eye of just ordinary modern teenagers didn't sit well with the ancient spirits that were associated with it. Who knows? I'm not judging people. I'm just speculating on what might have set that off.
Yeah. Interesting. Lana, do you have any questions?
No, not at this point.
Okay. Well,
I think that definitely what Neil said about Norfolk, there's a lot of history around there, an awful lot of history. You're talking about churches and monasteries and things. I visited Walsingham.
Oh, yes.
And that was a lovely, lovely place. Really loved that. But you could feel the history of the old churches there. Amazing places. around
It's a
Norfolk.
shrine as well. It's a shrine village, the shrine of Our Lady.
Yes.
The story
Yeah.
went that Richelle de Favershers saw a vision of a religious house in associated with Christ, and then it should be built in Norfolk, in Walsingham, and it's a beautiful story. And you go to the site of the old religious house where the big archway of the great window is still intact. The ponds are there, the layout. You walk through the door of the an ancient Shire Hall museum to get to the grounds, and it's like walking into fairyland. It's peace, absolute peace, green, ruins. It's absolutely beautiful.
Yep.
Yes, it is.
We have, I'm sure you have it over there too, but we experienced this recently here. We did a ghost walk at a fort here in Toledo, or it's actually in Perrysburg, but it was a fort from the War of 1812. And you can just it feels so much different on that property because of all of the the past violence and death and all that stuff, because there was a lot of recorded deaths in that fort, around the fort, and it's, you're right. So it's odd how people can walk onto properties and experience, like you said, that peace that is there. Whereas mine was the opposite with the battleground. I mean, you can just feel that just.
We mentioned prisons.
Yes.
And in Walsingham, in Great Britain, you had prisons, but you also had things called bridewells, which would often be where they would hold people while they were sometimes awaiting trial, and sometimes it would be a punishment. People would be set to work in a bridewell. And one of the most infamous, two murders in Norfolk were caused by the Burnham poisoners, two women who murdered the obstacles to their path of true love in a little village called Burnham Market. And they were both caught, and they were the first one. She was a married woman, Catherine Frary, and she was taken. She was the first of the pair to be caught, taken to the Walsingham bridewell, and there, bless her, and you have to say this because she is a human being. She broke. She was put into a place called the Dark Cell, which is all wooden walls. You're fed on bread and water, and as a soul, she was destroyed. I think she was a very, very, very naive lady. She had a belief in a type of witchcraft that believed in love philters. That believed in it was quite tragic. I don't think they were evil women, but I just think they were extremely naive.
More of a Wicca type thing, where that type of witchcraft.
They believed it. There was Mother Shorten, the Witch of Wells, used to sell love philters, and inside them, they weren't really meant to be taken orally. They'd be put onto the fire.
Okay.
And they might contain things that are quite poisonous. And for some reason, these two women got it into their heads that if one murders for the other, and they used poison to get rid of the obstacles for true love. So in other words, one of them loved Peter Taylor. Right, get rid of Mary Taylor. Poison her. And then the other one got rid of you get the pattern that's going on here. But it was so naive. They went to the local chemist and said they wanted poison for killing rats. They mixed it into the gruel. But the tragedy is that, the murders took place, and Cat Frary was taken to this dark cell, and she broke. She, as a human being, wasn't really fit to stand trial. But they put her through trial, and that's a rare thing, that somebody was so broken that they couldn't stand trial. Found guilty. of the murders, Catherine Frary and Francis Billings. They were hanged together in front of Norwich Castle.
Hmm.
And Cat Frary had to be carried, because remember, this is a public execution in the 1830s. She had to be carried to the gallows and held up while the noose was put around her neck. And she was hanged in Black Widow's weeds. And, you know, that's tragic. The ghosts of these two women are said to haunt the castle mound, drifting up hand in hand. But in that Walsingham Bridewell, that wing still exists.
Mhm.
And when I've had Dave Schrader and a group of Americans, I didn't tell them the story.
Hmm.
I said, look, let's go and investigate. Oh, okay, it's an old prison. Right, there we are. And it's the one wing that's left. It's got an upper story, lower story.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody sensed something. Their guts felt really awful, but it was down the bottom of the corridor in this dark cell, which, when all the shutters are open, as they were, there's no signage. It's very, very unspoiled. Everybody felt this is the room. This is the room where there's the presence, and it's the misery of Cat Frary, with the room where she broke, that stuck to those walls for all those years. Fascinating.
That's crazy. Yeah,
and it's not just American groups. You know, I've taken groups of students there, because it doesn't have a regular flow of visitors through there as well.
Mm-hmm.
You just feel that the atmosphere is untainted, that it could maybe be days, but since anybody's been in there, and when you go in, that the atmosphere is thick, it's heavy. And you will know that from both of your years of experience of paranormal research. You know it when it's untainted. No one else has passed through there for a while. Things are different.
And that unfortunately is one of the things, you know, as investigators and researchers and you know, paranormal people, you can't prove that to people. You have to experience that yourself. You have to go to that location and walk in that room and experience that yourself. And there's no way I can prove that to you that it's there. But
you're absolutely right, Jake.
Yeah.
And what I would never plead, but I would just wish. And I've been doing this a long while. We all have on this crew here. And it doesn't mean I'm better than anybody else by far. And I'm not. But what I would encourage people to do is don't keep destroying the gifts that you have by becoming reliant on the electronics. When you go to investigate somewhere, I'd say turn everything off. Everything. That's including that mobile phone.
Which
you
I
can
never
turn it
use.
off. It is possible. It can be turned off. Leave it out. Leave it outside.
We got to behave.
Maybe get a digital camera with no connection. One of those old-fashioned things, you know. That's all you need to do. And do your baseline. And I think this is a beautiful example of this is on the Holzer files, when you see Cindy Kaiser and Dave Schrader and going into these properties. There's no electronics. There is a camera, but keep it to a minimum and use your senses first. Don't walk into any property like the circus is coming to town.
Personally, that's what I like to use. I like to bring a video camera and audio recording stuff. I don't like all these things that light up. I will take an EMF meter around to get baselines to see if there's any EMF spikes. And it also depends on the situation. Going to a haunted location like that is completely different than helping a family. You know, which is what we do a lot here. Is I'm not going to bring my K2 meter into a family's house and tell them it's haunted because the K2 went off. when we all know that everything makes a K2 go off. You know what I mean? So it's
Absolutely right.
yeah. So
I
it's
just say to folks, go steady with it. And not to mention,
Mhm.
if you do actually contact a ghost, a being that has some sort of conscious awareness
Yeah.
of this world, you might be the first person to reach that uh, ghost in 200 years.
hmm
And 200 years ago, if you've got a flashing box in your hand that has not got a flame coming out of it,
Yeah.
it's witchcraft.
Yeah. Yeah. It's true.
You, you just even explain when you're
Yeah.
doing your baseline. Spirits, if you're here, we are
Yeah.
going to be coming in with some of our modern things.
Yeah.
But don't be afraid. You know,
Yeah.
if you are that person, and you might be
hmm
that person that will reach out and find that. And I think it helps keep people, it keeps you respectful, but
Yeah.
also be mindful of your gifts. And no matter how
Mhm.
skeptical you are, we've all got
I
it,
agree. I agree.
Yep.
you
Yep.
know?
Do you think, Neil, that Bram Stoker had a gift?
Yes.
He seemed to be very much into the occult,
Oh,
and
he
he
was.
mixed with people who also had an interest in the occult.
Mhm.
Bram Stoker, the author of Dracula and many other books that often involved a sort of darkly ghostly tales. He rather
Mm.
liked that. He was drawn to the dark, so I've always been drawn to
Mhm.
Bram.
Yeah.
Uh, he he couldn't walk until he was 7 years old, so he was told many stories when he was in
Mm.
his cot, you know, and in his bed as a little boy.
Yeah.
And I suspect, growing up as he did in Ireland, uh,
Mm.
he had an Irish maid, but also the family were old Irish as well. They've got a great British connection, the Stoker line.
Mm.
They go back to Morpeth in Geordieland in Northumberland. I've
Yes,
traced that tree.
that was very interesting. I was absolutely thrilled to read that part of it because
And
you mentioned Durham as well, which is my neck of the
absolutely
woods.
right. Yes.
Yeah.
But the Stokers that you will find in Morpeth are way back collateral ancestors of Bram Stoker.
Wow.
But he loved folk tales and legends.
Yeah.
His first experience of theatre were pantomimes, and we working out which one he would have gone to see, which would have been Bluebeard, which is this dark tale of a. Uh, he was described as a sort of potentate, possibly a
Yeah.
Middle Eastern one, a bit like Ali Baba, that sort of
Yeah.
thing. Before people were far more mindful about cultural differences and all sorts, you know, these old
Yeah.
school, violent, dark tales where the potentate has got through a number of wives and nobody really knows what's happened to them.
Yeah.
And the latest wife that really didn't want to marry him finds a key. And in fact, she's given the key to look after while he's away, but do not use this in the rooms in the castle. You know where you're allowed to
Yeah.
go. And she unlocks the door, the room where she shouldn't go, and finds the bodies of the earlier wives, you know. And she, in her horror, she drops the key and it falls in a pool of blood. And she found that she couldn't scrub the key clean. And it stained her hands, stained her clothes, and you get the idea. So
Yeah.
Bram had loved those ghostly stories from an early age, and then he started kind of creating his own before he'd even come to England. When he'd just finished at university, and I bet he'd had these stories rattling around for years. He wrote for it was a periodical, a bit like a newspaper magazine called The Shamrock, and you'll see some of his early works in there for things like The Chain of Destiny, which is a wonderful haunted house story, which includes 3 horrible old hags coming out of a bed towards the man who's inherited it. Now, the point is, hags and beds, and you will see that revisited in Dracula, when
Yeah.
having had
Yeah.
his years in theatre, or hags are one thing. You want to sell a book, make them pretty.
Yeah.
And three gorgeous women
Yeah.
rise out of the bed, and these women with vampire teeth, and so that's totally, in fact, that's totally Bram, that loved beauty in the world around him, beauty and good food and beautiful women. He was wonderful.
So your book
Oh,
is it?
sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say, since Lana, thank you for bringing us here, because I've been wanting to get to the Dracula side of things. So your book it's do you tell the true story of Dracula in your book, or is it the story of Bram Stoker, the author, or both?
It's called Bram Stoker,
Mhm.
the man who wrote Dracula.
Right.
It's an illustrated biography of the
Okay.
man, but the emphasis is on it's Bram's life,
Mhm.
because I think even though there are some super biographies out there, we're still learning new things about him. And I thought I've been fascinated with Bram since I was a kid,
Mhm.
and I think there are new things to share, and I think there should always, you see, Dracula the book has never been out of print, and I think there should always be good books on Bram available.
Yeah.
Because he deserves to be immortal. He never saw Dracula as a success.
Yeah. Yep.
His greatest literary legacy was his 2-volume biography of his boss, Sir Henry Irving, the greatest actor of his day.
Mhm.
That was described as his greatest literary legacy when Bram died.
Mhm.
But Bram's Dracula book has never ever gone out of print, so we should always remember him. So my book tells his story, but with a particular emphasis on his road to create Dracula,
Yeah.
how he created it, why he created it.
Because it's always I guess in doing a little bit of research for this show, there's a lot of very, very common misconceptions about how the story of Dracula originated. Like everybody, or not everybody, but a lot of people think it's based on Vlad the Impaler, which, according to what I've seen you say, that has no bearing on that story whatsoever. Like that's not even.
I'm afraid I won't be very popular with Transylvanian Tourist Authority, but the truth is, and all of the notes for Dracula were published years ago. Very good annotated version. There's one with Robert 18 Bysang, Dacre Stoker, Elizabeth Miller, all really good volumes, and you can read the notes. Okay,
Yeah.
and I just say, right, find me one reference by name to Vlad Tepes. The word Vlad, or the phrase or name Vlad the Impaler. Find me one reference. Go on, find it. There it is. Or maybe a little tipped in illustration of that woodcut you often see of Vlad the Impaler. No. In fact, Bram never even set foot in Transylvania. He never went there. He was a wonderful researcher. He had a wonderful imagination. He based his castles and locations on places he knew and places he imagined. His first ever book, Under the Sunset, was kids' stories. But you look at the Castle of the King, the darn thing is, you can see there's the origins of Castle Dracula.
Yeah.
And it's illustrated in the book. It's there. But I think it really was in the 1970s and 80s, when the Hammer films in Britain really sort of regenerated the Dracula genre, gave it a new shot in the arm, after the Universal monsters that Bela Lugosi started.
Yeah.
This was a brand new interest, and there was two guys, McNally and Florescu, who wrote the In Search of Dracula book, which is very, very well written, and it explores where this notion of a Transylvanian overlord, a count that may have inspired Bram Stoker because the notes hadn't been published. They weren't generally accessible.
Yeah.
It was a really good thought. It was well thought out, but I'm sorry, folks.
Not right.
There's what happened was Bram went on holiday to Whitby. It's on the Yorkshire coast. Really pretty place in the sunshine. It's got a fantastic abbey. It's got the steps going up there. It's historical. It's like little terracotta cottages with the River Esk going through. It's absolutely beautiful. But you get a bit of nighttime on it, and it's quite sinister too. And when he was there, he'd seen the wreck of a ship called the Dimitri, which becomes the Demeter in the book. And it had come from, Varna or somewhere. And I think he probably thought, let's learn a bit more about where the boats come from. And he goes to the local lending library and to the reference section, and there's a book, it's quite an old book. It was probably getting on for 60, 70-year-old book, Wilkinson's Guide to Wallachia and Transylvania. And inside there, and it's quite clear in Bram's notes, because up until that point, the story was going to be about Count Wampyr, Wampyr, Count Wampyr and the Undead. That's the title. It would be pronounced Vampire, which is wonderful. Bram loved language, but for most English people, picking that book up...
Sorry again. This
Hello,
is frustrating.
darling. Most people picking that book up with a title like Count Wampyr and the Undead, it ain't going to do that well.
Right.
But this is the working title. And Bram is looking through Wilkinson's Guide to Wallachia. He finds a brief reference to a mercenary, not a desperately good one, according to the Wilkinson account, called Dracula. Yeah. In his notes, it says it means Dracula, son of the, it's the devil or son of the dragon. It's very brief, and it's quite clear that it's just the name. And you can imagine when you actually say the word Dracula, it rolls around your mouth. Other authors that have picked up on this say it kind of clicks around, and I quite agree. It cracks, it snaps, it just works. And if you think about it, what a gamble it became. It must have been a name that went bang. This is the one. Yeah. Because Bram Stoker got rid of Count Wampyr. Get rid of that. Then it was going to be Dracula or the Undead. And just before publication, get rid of the Undead, it's just Dracula. Now, people would not know what or who that was. It was a hell of a gamble, but that's what it was. And published in a yellow binding with red lettering. The yellow because that was for quite ostentatious avant-garde, rather risque books.
The stage version of Dracula didn't go well, though, did it?
Well, the very first ever version, it was performed for copyright reasons on the stage of the Lyceum, and it was the same month that Dracula was published, so it was May 1897, and it was more or less a reading of the play, an adaptation of it, and it wasn't really meant for the public because the price was prohibitive. The price was a guinea, and that's more than any of the top performances. For an average seat, a guinea. Oh, that's too expensive.
Yeah.
And it was during the daytime, so you're not going to get many. They didn't want many people there.
Yeah.
Some folks did come, including Bram Stoker's boss, Sir Henry Irving. And as you all know, Lana, his comment was when Bram said, "Well, what did you think?" He said, "Dreadful." But was it
I
dreadful
know.
and it was horrible or dreadful? Because, oh God, it's awful.
That
Well,
must have been terrible for Bram. It must have hit him hard.
it must have done, because Bram wrote the book for him, really.
Yeah.
He wanted to create a story that his boss, the man he had idolized, Sir Henry Irving, over the years, though, he did become a bit of an emotional vampire, but he sucked a lot of the life out of Bram by working the poor man into the ground at his beck and call. But
He seemed very demanding, and
terribly demanding.
yeah,
Bram was run ragged,
yeah,
but Bram didn't mind, because Bram idolized him.
yes,
And Bram wanted to create this book for the man he idolized, in the hope that the play that could come out of the book would be performed by Irving. And this was Bram's big gambit, Dracula. That was it.
Here's a question from the audience.
Hello.
Lisa, this is my sister-in-law. She asks, can you ask Neil which movie adaptation was closest to Bram's book? The Hammer or Universal versions?
Oh, now that's a tricky question. The best ever adaptation is the BBC one. It was a BBC TV drama version from the 1970s, starring Louis Jourdain, where they even film in Whitby. So that if you want to see quite a lot, and a very good British actor cast, very, very good. But of Hammer or Dear Old Baylor, they both have iconic moments, don't they? If it hadn't been not for Bela Lugosi, we wouldn't have the modern film genre, I think, of Dracula that we have today. If we hadn't have had Dracula the book in 1897, I don't think we would have the horror genre of the undead and vampires that we have today. So it's got a great lineage. But if you want me to speak really, what frightened me when I was a kid, where we started, Jeff and Lana, it was the Hammer films. Why were they frightening? Because they took me to a different world. They took me to creatures, to things that were absolutely uncanny at a time when, kids were still frightened, would dive to the back of the sofa or hide behind the door to watch stuff on TV. This was genuinely frightening, but there was something that struck me about the Hammer Victoriana, the Victorian world of Hammer, which is often the tall hats, the long capes, the femme fatales, but certainly the capes with red lining. And then if you think about that, it's kind of reflected in the scenery as well, with the dark stone and the red drapes. That's what captured my imagination. So although it's the original Dracula is quite loosely based on the story, the early Hammers are loosely based on it, but they all have elements that capture along the way.
There seems to have been a lot of influences, ranging from his mother telling him stories of, the epidemic in Sligo, and there was a strange tale, wasn't there, of a man who was quite tall for the standard size.
Yes. Yeah, the Sligo cholera epidemic, which Bram Stoker's mother witnessed when she was a girl. They were living in Sligo, and lots of people had tragically succumbed to cholera, and they were being kept in one building. And this fella by the name of Long Sergeant Callan, tall fella, and as they were carrying him out, you've got to remember, at the time of cholera, people worried about these infection. And so doctors, nurses, those with the qualifications to spot life extinct or life present, they're either dead or they're gone. So you've got people that don't really know what they're looking for, that don't really understand how to take a pulse even. And so if someone looks dead, they pretty much are. You know, if sometimes they'd actually put somebody into a coffin to be buried, they'd nail it up and they'd hear groaning from inside. But they'd say things like, "Oh, they're going to die anyway." You just leave them nailed up, which is why they had this kind of undead fears of the Victorians. When years later, you know, they find coffins with clawed insides.
They would put bells in strings
That's
in
right.
coffins.
Absolutely, yes, there'd be a manual pull bell or even electric bells that they fitted with.
Yep.
But Long Sergeant Callan, when he was carried out of the Sligo building that had, I don't know whether that was a town hall or the hospital, but it had steps up to it. And as they brought the body out, the head of Long Sergeant Callan struck on the steps down, and it brought him round. And he did. He survived his cholera and went on to live for a good many years afterwards too. So certainly Bram knew the story of a man apparently risen from the dead from his earliest years.
Yeah, it's. I don't know why my mind went to here, but it obviously it's not related at all. But it went to that Monty Python scene where they're throwing the bodies in the cart in the Holy Grail, and the guy's screaming, "I'm not dead yet." I just got for a walk. And they club him over the head. Like,
absolutely right.
When you were telling that, I just thought of that for some reason.
And you know, the team of Monty Python are so good because they have backgrounds as historians or literature. They're pretty good scholars, Terry Jones in particular. And so they will base some of that on true stories.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yep.
With a twist.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, that was. I loved Monty Python stuff.
And did oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Just while we're talking about the undead or the risen dead, where did he get his idea of sort of the beautiful immortal lady lying in the coffin from Dante Gabriel Rossetti's experience with when he exhumed his wife?
That's a fascinating thought. Bram's dear friend, probably his best friend, was Thomas Henry Hall Caine. Now, most people will not have heard of Hall Caine nowadays, but in Bram's day, Hall Caine was the first man to sell 1 million books in the English language. He was massive, but his stories don't translate for modern audiences.
No.
But he was a great friend of Bram Stoker. And I think he got a lot of these interesting ideas via Hall Caine. And
right.
Hall Caine knew, because they used to love telling stories by firelight. And Hall Caine was a great friend of Dante Gabriel Rossetti. They lived near each other. And so he would have known about this instance where Rossetti had buried his book of poetry, curled into his wife's hair when she died. And of course, they go and recover it by night. I think they had an exhumation order, but they would, and apparently she was in very, very good state of repair, or uncorrupt, despite being in the ground for some time. So that all ends this kind of dead, undead. That's certainly part of the Bram Stoker creation, because he knew the pre-Raphaelite artists or were acquainted to them through Hall Caine, but also they used to come to the theatre. So that in part are the brides of Dracula, but also he spoke of the women whose eyes could blaze. And Christina Nielsen, an opera singer, one of the true queens of the night on the operatic stage, whose eyes could blaze. She's certainly one of them, as was Sarah Bernhardt, the legendary Sarah Bernhardt, who one of her gimmicks, because she's this gothic, the first true big name gothic actress. She wanted a portable bed. That's the truth. That could be comfortable and reliable and hers, and save money, could sleep in the theatre.
Yeah.
But it became this gimmick that it's shaped like a coffin. So she slept in this, and she was beautiful in coffin with all, and people, her fans would bring flowers and that would be wreaths and all sorts. So there she would be in her dressing room mausoleum, sleep in a coffin. All great for publicity. It also meant she had a good night's sleep.
Very much
But
so.
also, she loved you. She used to stand in the wings and watch Irving when she was in London. She performed on the London stage. She was one of the very first women to perform the lead in Hamlet on the London stage. Sarah Bernhardt. Not a lot of people know that.
Wow.
She was formidable and wonderful.
And also, I didn't know when I was reading the book, is it Buffalo Bill?
Oh,
yes. He was an influence as well.
He's Buffalo Bill. Now, it's always one of those frustrating things that when you produce a book, there will be something, a piece of information or even a picture that will come along once you've published it. And it was about a month after my book came out, and I think in the second edition, it's got to go in. I know that Bram Stoker and Buffalo Bill had met.
Yeah,
we knew that they'd met in London. But I wanted to find one of these nice old Victorian illustrations where they would show them together at an event. They would sometimes show the various personalities in a group or in little ovals all around it.
Yeah.
Those in the same room. And blow me, a month after the book came out, there's a beautiful illustration, line drawing of Henry Irving, Buffalo Bill. And because, Bram's Irving's manager, he doesn't always even feature on the pictures, but there he is in a little oval in his own right. And I thought,
yeah.
The Buffalo Bill was a great influence for the story. The notion of how some of the Native American tribes, the fighting men could stalk, that was of great interest to Bram Stoker. But Quincy Morris, the often forgotten and least portrayed of all the characters in the Dracula book, is an American, and he carries a Jim Bowie knife. And in fact, it's one of those things that is the ultimate demise of Dracula, is the removal of his head, and we need to have the big knife to do it. So you can see this sort of gallant slaying of Dracula. There's a whole team of them that achieve that.
Yeah.
But Quincy is to the fore with his big knife, and he's an American. Wonderful. Bram loved America. He really did, and he loved his American tours. And in fact, Bram wrote what is regarded as the first travel log of America in the 19th century. It's called A Glimpse of America, and it was really his travel log of the tour around. And it was the first sort of really big theatrical tour from Europe over there by train, because all the trains are going in, in the 1870s, 1880s, the age of the West, the Wild West, as we know from movies and stuff. Well, a lot of America is still developing at that time. You've still got frontier towns and all sorts of crazy. But also places like Chicago and New York, old established towns. And Bram is just kind of capturing that modern world that we're starting to see in the States. Fascinating. A wonderful writer.
There's I was gonna, if you've got something else, go ahead, but there's two things that I have to get to before we go, for sure. But go ahead, Lena. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, I was just going to say, did Florence travel with him to America?
Bram's wife, Florrie Stoker, she was terrified about cross country, being at sea in a boat, absolutely terrified, because she had been in a near fatal sinking on a cross-channel ferry with their son Noel. They had got into a rescue boat. Some people had died on the vessel. It was, and she sort of vowed never again. So for those journeys, she didn't. But when things were kind of, the poor old Lyceum was on the way out, and Irving himself was a dying man. He wasn't a well man. And I don't know, something changed, and Florrie, I think, felt she needed to be there for Bram, who also wasn't desperately well. She wanted to be by his side, and the illustration, the line drawing that I published it's the first time it's ever been published. It appears in my biography of Bram and Florrie as their boat departs from Great Britain, and you could see in their faces that something is coming to an end.
Yeah.
And
It
so
must have been a shock when Irving died. For Bram, it must have been a great
Irving
shock.
had not been well. Like Bram would have worked himself to death for Irving. And there'd been warning signs that Irving had lung troubles, like a sort of consumption that he was suffering from. He's coughing up blood. He's not taking the advice to take it easy. And it did come as a terrible, terrible shock, but it wasn't entirely unexpected.
See, so a couple of things that I wanted to get to, because I mean, I know it's super late where you're at, so I'm going to try and keep this close to an hour. Hopefully, you got a few more minutes that you can,
of course,
you can do with us. But how close is the story of Nosferatu to the?
Oh, that's naughty. That's a naughty question. Now, Nosferatu is Murnau. Now, it's German production. And he was really naughty because he ripped off really the Dracula story. Count Orlok. Oh my God! What a manifestation of Dracula!
Right.
Superb. Why he didn't broker a deal, I don't know. It was stupid that he didn't, and it cost him, because I think he probably assumed Bram's dead, but Florrie's still very much alive, and she sued the pants off him, as part of the legal deal, every copy of Nosferatu should have been destroyed, which is why for many years all we had was the grainy version. Now it's been restored and it's wonderful, and I'm glad it has been. But it was very close enough to get that sort of legal action and recompense.
And there's another movie about the making of Nosferatu that I thought was really, really good. I mean, it's not related to the real Dracula story for sure, but I just thought that was a fantastic movie.
I liked it. We won't spoil it, but I like the kind of twists and quirkiness to it. And I think in the sort of vampire fan world, you either love that or that film or hate it. And I'm happy to kind of. I don't love it with a passion, but I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it. Sometimes you've got to disconnect, folks, and just see a film for a film. And just enjoy it.
But another thing that, so in prepping for this show and listening to you talk, like almost the story behind the classic story is much more interesting than the story itself, because his whole life went in his life experiences went into creating this. And it like you said before, if it was vampire, or if it was called something other than just Dracula, it wouldn't be the same. And in all of these influences,
absolutely right.
It's just that's art. That is true art when you can bring that all into a fictional creation. That is
what the way you have summed it up there, Jeff, is absolutely. I couldn't have put it better myself. It is an art, a passion.
Right.
It is the finest example of Bram Stoker's work. I commend people to read others. The Duel of the Seven Stars is quite good fun, which is one of the very first ever reanimated mummy stories, which is it's not bad. But the one I think is often they say it's the weird tale. Give it a go. The Lair of the White Worm. It's a worm, you see, in British folklore, that's a big old dragon. And this is a big old dragon that lays waste to some land when it stalks around at night. It's a quirky tale, it's a crazy tale, it involves mesmerism and the power of the mind. Bram was fascinated with mind control. He wrote to Sir Oliver Lodge quite extensively on the matter. If you think about it, even in Dracula, there's the control of the mind, control of the wild beasts, control over many, many, many miles of Bram Stoker controlling Renfield. But in Lair of the White Worm, there's a storyline in that where a guy had supposedly worked with Mesmer, and his sort of logbooks are all there, and he wondered, and Bram explores the idea of, would it be possible to kill by the power of the mind?
That's it, yeah.
Interesting.
One other question I had to ask you was, because you do have that book about Jack the Ripper, and you said you were fascinated with that story. Have you ever heard the theory that H.H. Holmes, one of the biggest mass murderers here in the States, have you ever heard the theory that he is actually Jack the Ripper? Because
I've heard Jeff Mudgett passionately argue the case now, and I'm acquainted with Jeff via the wonder of Facebook and communication, and I respect Jeff. Quite rightly, H.H. Holmes is this infamous killer in the United States. Jack the Ripper, no.
Okay.
With respect and all that is good. Come on.
I don't know enough. I don't know enough about the Jack the Ripper story to really have an opinion on that. But I thought that was an interesting take. I mean, he definitely lays out a pretty good case. Jeff Mudgett does in his book. That
he passionately argues his case, how good it is, and how robust it is, and how it stands up. I would urge people to read widely and judge for themselves. Don't get caught up with it. And to be honest with you, it's a great idea. It's rather like saying, oh, Prince Albert Victor, the Duke of Clarence, oh, a royal, was Jack the Ripper. It's seductive. The Queen's surgeon, poor old William Withigull. It's all seductive. But read widely, read well. I think Bram Stoker, he was acquainted, and Hall Caine knew Francis Tumblety, Irish-born, American-raised quack doctor with a morbid hatred of women, all of the skills he had, and he even had a collection of uterus in jars, which he would use to explain why women are so disgusting at dinner parties. I could go on. We'll find another show another time. But in 1888, the Clever Money Special Branch, the top man, Chief Inspector Littlechild, said the highly likely suspect is Francis Tumblety. And the more you dig of Tumblety, the more you find. He fled to America after the Ripper crimes, and my friend Mike Hawley has now traced his sort of bloody trail across America. Wherever Tumblety went, murder followed soon after.
Right.
Interesting. Well, I guess we put that rumor to bed. No, that's it. Just I've always wanted to ask, or not always wanted to, but I wanted to ask you that question because I know that you're familiar with both stories and stuff. There was something else that I wanted. Oh crap! It slipped my mind. Lana, do you have anything else?
I just wanted to ask about Bram's death, because there were several things, weren't there, connected with his condition, with his health.
Bless him. I mean, bless him. Bram was ill for the best part of 10 years, the first 10 years of the 20th century, really. In fact, probably even from the late 19th, from the time of Dracula. Been ill a long while. It was gradually affecting him. You could see that there were some mood swings. The way he walks, he was absorbed. When he went to his beloved Cruden Bay in Scotland, he would have known it as Port Errol, and the way he walks along the beach and he's shouting at the waves, and the poor man was ill. And then when he died in the same time of year as the Titanic, the same year, and within a very short period of time, Bram dies, the Titanic goes down. So his death is kind of masked and lost amongst the mourning for the Titanic. But what killed Bram Stoker? Well, the death certificate gives number one is exhaustion. It doesn't surprise me. He worked so hard to follow his dream and to write and to back up Irving. Number one, exhaustion. Number two, liver failure. Well, he loved a good drink. Good man.
Yeah.
and the final was the kind of locomotor ataxia, which is believed by medical historians to be a very nice way to say syphilis. Intriguingly, Florrie Stoker didn't suffer from syphilis. She never had it, and she lived for many years after Bram. So, what caused that? What encounter he had? We can only speculate, and in some ways, I think that detracts a little bit from the man and the genius that was Bram Stoker. It was a sad end for such a great man who was so well loved. And the note I would wish to remember him by is that those that knew Bram, and some people had known them since they started off in the acting business, when they reflected on him, that if you knew Bram and you became friends for life. Good times and bad. And when Hall Caine, who was a dreadful hypochondriac, was supposedly on his deathbed, Bram's not well. He's travelling all the way from London to the Isle of Man. That's quite a journey. Got to get out on the Irish Sea. Bram's not well, to make sure, to go and see his buddy who's on his deathbed. And that didn't help Bram when he was very ill, to be running around about Hall Caine. But Bram wouldn't have had it any other way.
Yeah.
He knew.
He seemed quite caring. He seemed as though even the people who were waiting at the Lyceum to get in, didn't he serve them tea and bread and butter? And
of course he would, keep them warm.
Yeah.
And people affectionately remembered him for that.
Yeah.
Like the rest of us, he was no saint. No one's perfect.
Yeah.
Right.
But he was a kind man who was remembered that if you are a friend of Bram, you are a friend for life. And he knew what it was to be a good friend. Yeah. And in this world, that's a quality I don't think we should lose.
Yeah.
No.
Totally
I
agree.
know.
Yep.
And I have to say as well that you've written it beautifully. There's a lot of respect for him that shines through.
It's love for Bram, but also his family, and Dacre Stoker, my dear friend, always welcoming, always responds to emails. We can translate Stokerese because Bram was writing tens of letters every day, and he's having to write so darn quickly. It's a real scrawl. So between the two of us, I think we probably read more Bram Stoker than anybody else in the world. so here we can translate Stokerese. Yep. I love that. And
in your book is unique too in the fact that like I said, it's so everybody knows the story of Dracula, yet you've written about the man that wrote it. And that's, it's not too often that people get to hear backstories about authors and things like that. And,
it's been a real labor of love, but driven by the fact that the more I learn about him, I find he's a kindred spirit. We both loved our time. I wasn't desperately well as a very young child. Fortunately, I could walk. Bram couldn't.
Yeah.
We both enjoyed our time at university. We both played competitive rugby. We're both Freemasons. We both worked in the civil service in jobs until we could get the jobs that we've always wanted to do. They don't always pay the best money, but they're the jobs we've always wanted to do. And the more you read about him, his love of good food and wine and good company and knowing what it is to be a good friend. Well, come on. What's to dislike about Bram Stoker?
Yeah.
He's a real person. And I mean that he's realistic. And I think anybody, man or woman, would enjoy his company and would love to go and meet for a meal and a drink and a bloody good night of great stories and storytelling with the man who wrote Dracula.
Yeah. So if people want to buy the book, this is what it looks like. Hopefully you guys can see it real good. It's available, I know, on Amazon because that's where we got it, I think. And I'm sure it's available anywhere books are sold.
Barnes & Noble in the States, Amazon UK. Yeah. And it's not just a book of words, but lots and lots of pictures and letters and interesting. Bram even created the programs for the theatre. He was absolutely assiduous in how they should look and to get things just right, get the tone right and the way things were described. Oh, a remarkable man.
It's a fascinating book, Neil, and you're a fascinating person too.
Oh, bless your hearts. Well, thank you both so much for having me on the show. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Yeah. And one more thing before you leave, there's going to be an event in February that I want Lana to talk about for a second because you're going to be a speaker at it as well.
Yes. Well, obviously, for people who live in the UK, or you might like to fly over from America to see Neil talk in person. Because he's going to be at Lumley Castle on the 11th of February. And it'll be a day's event. It's a paranormal seminar, so it's a cross-section of subjects that will interest those who love the paranormal.
And some super speakers, and I'm very proud to be one of them.
Yes.
And I shall be presenting my illustrated talk on Bram Stoker, the man who created Dracula. You can see it live.
Yeah, that would be worth the price of admission right there. I think.
Oh, just bless to see you. That. Thank you. But there's a lot of good people. We don't. What I like about Lana is that she will not. We don't want people with egos.
No.
We want people that want to share.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And that's the important.
Share knowledge.
Yep.
Yeah. Absolutely right.
Yep.
Absolutely.
And I'll say that about Lana too. She's doing this for the right reasons. It's not for no one's getting rich off of these, conventions and these events and things like that. And it is, Lana is all about having people at her stuff with integrity, people of integrity at her events. She doesn't.
I quite agree. And I tell you what, I meant to just have a coffee with Lana once, when we met in Durham. I lost a whole day.
Yep.
She's absolutely lovely to talk with on all sorts of topics and good fun, thoroughly enjoyable company. As has your company has been delightful too, Jeff. Thank you so much.
Appreciate you coming on.
It's a pleasure.
I'd love to have you back on again. I've said everybody we've had on this season so far, it's like there's so much more to talk to you about, and we scratch the surface. So. Hopefully, maybe next year sometime we can coax you to stay up till 1 o'clock in the morning again and join us.
I would be delighted.
Great stories.
I would be delighted.
You're a fantastic storyteller. Thank you.
And thank you
to everybody out there. May your God go with you. God bless.
This is that awkward part. How do we end this? It's so because you hit the end stream button and then there's a few seconds. So you're just kind of sitting here awkward. I'm going to go ahead and play this intro, and then I'll hit the end stream. So hang on for 1 second, if you would.